They say you feel the climate of the forest change when she passes through. The trees interlock their branches like fingers, leaning inward, hiding in the fog, almost like they know a secret, too dark, tragic, or scary to share. They say you can see her coming from a mile away, a witch with iron teeth, a long nose, and glowing yellow eyes, navigating through a mortar and steering with a pestle. But they know not of her tracks, for she sweeps them away with her large broom. They speak of Baba Yaga. However, folklore rarely talked about the house she lived in, a hut on chicken legs, a hut that follows commands, a hut that's always watching. Three friends wandered into the forest that night. It was dark and rainy, with distant thunder nearing with every crack, like it was following them. But that wasn't the only thing following the trio that night. This trip was a rather spontaneous one. Ivan had just received his inheritance. The young man never cared about money. He felt there were greater things in life that brought one joy. If anything, he was going to give most of the money away to Yuri and Mikhail, his two best friends. Therefore, to celebrate this news, Yuri and Mikhail took Ivan out for a cozy trip of hiking and exploration. However, Ivan told them that he wouldn't be long, as his girlfriend was waiting for him back at home. The trio ventured in the woods many a times, but now they may have traveled too far. The air felt fouler and thicker. The trees swayed unnaturally and more troubling. They could hear monstrous footsteps. "We should not have come here," said Ivan. The forest had now felt darker than before. The fog seemed thicker and more ominous and suffocating. But Yuri and Mikhail laughed. "We'll be fine, my friend," they said. They would travel a little further and their visibility became worse. Then they would turn back. But then, behind them they heard and felt the ground cracking and crumbling and rebuilding itself within a few seconds. Then they heard a thud. When they turned around, there was now a strange-looking hut in front of them. It looked old and worn out. The wood was a dull shade of brown with splinters sticking out. The windows were more like half-lidded eyes. The hut was rather small, or so it seemed. Yuri asked, was the hut there when we passed by? But none of them knew. The fog was so bad that anything could have been there before. Suddenly, the hut seemed to push off the ground, but it wasn't on stilts. Two long, monstrous chicken legs grew from the hut's base, standing tall and daunting. The trio could not believe their eyes, for the hut came alive. It walked towards them slowly with malicious intent. Alas, those were the footsteps they heard earlier. The door creaked open, but the hut groaned and trembled when it did so, like a human stretching their body after a long nap. Then a ladder made of old wood and rope sprung out the door, touching the dampened ground. Though it wasn't merely inviting them inside, rather commanding them to. Behind the windows were candlelight that appeared at the flip of a switch. The trio, however, refused to enter. Instead, they slowly backed up, grabbing their belongings, and without hesitation, made a run for it. No matter how fast they ran or however many sharp turns they took, the hut was always right behind them. The large chicken leg stamped against the ground, its talons digging and tearing through the soil with every stride. However, the hut itself, if the situation and atmosphere was different, looked rather comical. It was wobbly and flimsy, like the house wasn't made of wood but of jelly. It ran towards them like a drunk person, and that's what made it more frightening. The hut was not leading them to whence they came, rather chased them deeper into the woods. The trio was breathing heavy, with their legs feeling like giving up in their escape. But if the hut behind them didn't scare them enough, then the path ahead would compensate. It wasn't just a living hut they had to worry about, it was also the forest. The trees were working against them. Its branches opened with a gush of wind, taking swipes at the three young men. The trees began swaying side to side, leaning in closer, and suddenly, a vast forest with ample space had now felt claustrophobic. With the sound of a thunder crack so loud and strong that the three friends felt it in their chests, the footsteps behind them had then stopped. They dared to stop, catch their breath, and look behind them, but the hut wasn't there. The trees had also calmed down, but the fog, still thick and heavy. Ivan, Yuri, and Mikhail sighed in relief. They felt at ease but also bewildered. Were they hallucinating? Or was the forest playing tricks on them? However, fear was not yet lost, for in front of them lay something far worse. A bone fence. A fence built from femurs with skulls at the top instead of cappings. It created a large perimeter, but what was the fence enclosing or even protecting? There was nothing there. But then the hut crept up behind them, not charging forward this time. The windows were opening and closing on their own in rapid succession, yet there was no wind. It walked towards the trio, pushing and backing them up into the space surrounded by the bone fence. The eyes of every skull had lit up with flames, and the hut gently walked to its spot like an animal remembering where it slept. It spun on its base as the chicken legs were swallowed into the hut from underneath, dropping and slamming the house to the ground. The air was still and the night silent than ever. The hut never moved, the door didn't open, and the windows behaved themselves like they were scolded for the noise they made. A sigh of relief from the three young men. Of course, they were not foolish enough to continue their trip, but they needed just a few more minutes the night could spare them to catch their breath. Mikhail said that was a close one, but it seems we're safe. Words that were spoken too soon. Words that were so wrong. They heard an eerie laughter that sent chills down their spine. They heard thunderous footsteps approaching behind them. Though this time, they never needed to look behind, rather directly above. Baba Yaga was standing behind, looking over them.
Safe isn't the word that I would use.
It was quite ironic. The forest had calmed down, the wind stopped blowing, the trees were still, and the storm clouds had disappeared. Yet Ivan, Yuri, and Mikhail felt more petrified than they did before. While they stood there frozen with fear, in front of them was none other than Baba Yaga. The witch was tall despite the hunch in her back whenever she walked, her spine bowed like a fragile branch. She wore an old, tattered robe-like cloak, which looked to be brown but was now darkening with age. Baba Yaga carried and used a walking stick that looked more like a jagged, irregular weapon made of birch. Whenever she put pressure, leaning her weight against it, the forest ground seemed to sink in that spot and that spot only. However, when they saw her face, that's what consumed their souls with fear. Her skin was pale and wrinkly, her eyes glowing a murky yellow, but not taking the attention away from her long, sharp iron teeth. Her nose was large and long, and her nostrils flared whenever she snuffed. Ivan, without hesitation, dropped to the ground, his right hand over his bent knee. "Oh, Baba Yaga," he said, "please forgive us with the kindness in your heart. We are eternally sorry for invading your home." Ivan's head was down, looking at the ground the entire time. Baba Yaga walked towards him, gently caressing the side of his face with her long, dirty, razor-sharp fingernail. She said,
I like this one.
Yuri, next to Ivan, followed the same procedure, but his actions were guided by fear and false respect. Baba Yaga dragged her sharp fingernail across the side of his face, tearing the skin and watching the blood gradually drip down.
You not so much.
Then it was Mikhail's turn. He bowed as elegantly as Ivan, his words true and sincere. "Forgive me, Baba Yaga," he said. "Please spare me by bestowing upon me your priceless gratitude." Sincere and respectful. But it angered Baba Yaga. She growled at Mikhail and grabbed his jaw with her large hand. Her fingernails dug inside the sides of his face and she said,
I see right through you."
How strange. They heard of Baba Yaga's ambiguous nature, but none as contradictory as her actions now. The witch was never truly good or pure evil. She was primal, and that mattered more than folk would realize. Any further pressure from her grip and Mikhail's jaw would have shattered. However, she let go. Baba Yaga slowly walked away from them towards the hut. She opened the door and grabbed a cleaver, then returned to the trio. Panic settled in faster than they could breathe. Ivan said, "What are you going to do to us?" Mikhail asked the same, "What are you going to do to me?" However, Baba Yaga does not answer questions that waste her time. The three young men had no idea their limbs would soon be chopped off and make a good renovation addition to the bone fence. But just as Baba Yaga pressed the cold blade of the cleaver against Mikhail's leg, the hut groaned. The witch was interrupted, clicked her tongue, then tried again. This time the hut groaned even louder, and Baba Yaga threw the cleaver onto the ground. In annoyance, she says,
Little hut, turn your back to the forest and face your front to me."
The hut spun on its base, swirling in the air, and followed the instruction to the T. So the three young men were not dreaming. The hut was indeed alive. Then the windows were swallowed inside the hut and replaced with large, round, amber eyes. The pupils moved side to side rapidly, then fixed themselves onto the trio. The chicken legs grew from the base once again, but this time, the hut ran towards Ivan. It sized him up, snuffing his character, yet it had no nose. Baba Yaga snapped her fingers and the door was replaced with a mouth. With its long tongue and sharp teeth, it swallowed Ivan, taking him into the hut. The other two had met the same fate, but their abductions were more painful and vigorous. Then the hut slammed itself to the ground, with three young, innocent men trapped inside. Baba Yaga giggled and applauded, then sat on a wooden chair waiting eagerly. Now the hut was just a house, but the inside was more baffling than the outside. It seemed so small at first, but when the hut expanded into infinite hallways, rooms, and doors, then Ivan began panicking. What was really going on with this hut? Was it evil? Was Baba Yaga controlling it? With the three men standing close together, petrified as they have ever been, an eerie, echoing voice came through.
"Why did you come to the forest?"
Yuri stood frozen, Mikhail began crying, and Ivan, trembling, had answered, "We were celebrating the inheritance given to me. Thus we have chosen a night out of hiking and traveling in the forest." Yuri and Mikhail had said the same thing, but now the hut had groaned. Three large doors appeared in front of them, old, rotting, and chained. Then the voice had spoken.
"Place your hand on the handle and open the door. If your answer was true, your trial will be easier. If it was not, you shall not make it out alive."
These trials would have nothing to do with physical strength. Rather, it would test character, intent, and desire. Who are you behind a closed door? What is it you truly desire when the outside world isn't watching? You may lie and weasel out your way from others, but can you really lie to yourself? And so the young men nervously grabbed their respective door handles, pushing it down slowly and hesitantly. They opened their doors respectively. Ivan was confused at what the room had showed. Yuri was ecstatic and Mikhail was petrified. Once they entered, the doors behind them slammed shut, unable to open or budge. Then it disappeared, like they were never inside an old hut at all. As Baba Yaga waits patiently outside, she was curious to see on how two friends would soon be killed. Yuri entered the garden of Whispering Vales. That might sound peculiar, but that's exactly what it was. The garden was breathtakingly beautiful. Stone walls and fountains, vibrant plant colors, and an aroma of sweetness. As the moonlight kissed the garden, one might mistake this place for their own slice of heaven, if not for the Vales. There were hundreds, if not more, red, thick, velvety drapes spread throughout the garden. They were not tied or hooked, just suspended by emptiness, blowing in the cool breeze that night. The Vales whispered to Yuri, commanding him to leave, but he never paid attention to it. Why would he? His focus was fixed on the most beautiful woman that he had ever seen. She sat on a stone bench, her hair matching the color of the drapes, but she wasn't unknown to Yuri, for this woman was Ivan's beloved. Ivan's girlfriend never paid attention to Yuri in the real world. She knew him by name and acknowledged him as a friend, but nothing more. Yuri, however, paid great attention to her. He wanted her. He would have dreams about this woman, lustful thoughts and physical attachments. He was jealous of Ivan. Yuri was stronger than him, could hunt better than him, was more muscular than him. Were those not the perfect qualities of men? Why did she choose Ivan? However, in the garden of Whispering Vales, that dynamic was different. The woman called out to him, smiling and joyful to see him. Yuri walked briskly towards her, towards his love, but the red velvety drapes blew vigorously from a gush of wind, obstructing his path. Infuriated, he smacked it away and continued his walk, but now the woman was further than before. With every step, the drapes interrupted him, stopping him, preventing him. They would latch onto his back, tie themselves around Yuri's leg and hand, pulling him away. However, his resilience untied those knots. Further and further away she moved, and the faster that Yuri traveled. He was tired, almost defeated by the red drapes in the garden, but he finally reached her. He took deep breaths, perspiring profusely, until he sat next to her. This was the closest he had ever been to Ivan's girlfriend. To smell her jasmine fragrance, to feel her breath on his skin, and finally, to experience her loving touch. However, when she grabbed his hand, Yuri felt a prick. "Ouch," he said in annoyance, frowning at her. He looked down at her hand and saw a thorn sticking out, now covered in his blood. So the woman apologized and this time pulled him closer. When she embraced him, he felt that same prickly sensation all over his body. This time he was angrier than before and pushed her away. He gasped in horror, taking a few steps back. Ivan's girlfriend had more than 1,000 thorns sticking out from her body. Alas, Yuri decided to walk away, but his lust had pulled him back. She stood there with open arms waiting for another embrace. Yuri, reluctantly and carefully trying to hug her without getting poked, had soon met his fate. The red velvet drapes that suffocated the garden had now began wrapping them up. When Ivan's girlfriend held him, every thorn pierced through his skin. Albeit he couldn't depart. The drapes tightened around them from feet to head, holding the couple tight until Yuri fell to the ground covered in blood. Thorns were everywhere in his body, including his nose, lips, and eyeballs. In his final moments with bloody, blurry vision, he reached out his hand, but Ivan's girlfriend was no longer in the garden. There weren't any drapes or beautiful stone walls and fountains. The plants were all withered and the weeds were plentiful. The moon had changed a blood red and the air stank of jealousy. Such was the ending of Yuri's trial. One down, one to go. Mikhail's trial was much shorter than Yuri's in the real world, but to him, it lasted an eternity. He entered the graveyard of clenched fists. The land was barren with dead trees here and there. The evening was dark and gloomy with a vicious storm that took over. There were empty dugout graves spread across the land, yet there were no tombstones. These folk were not even worth remembering. Mikhail heard strange noises from the graves. Grunts, growls, snorts, hisses, but mostly moans, gasping for help. He trembled with fear until he dared approach one of the empty graves. He saw how deep it was, like it became an underground passage of infinite emptiness. But inside the grave was a man who was undead. His zombified body startled Mikhail. Just bones with little skin and flesh wrapped around it. The undead man still had his clothes on, albeit they were torn and dirty. He had no lips, just teeth clanking against each other. His eyes were tiny, almost hidden behind the large hollow eye sockets. Then Mikhail began laughing at him. The undead man was trying to climb out the grave, but he couldn't. Not that it was slippery or too steep, because his fists were clenched. Mikhail said, "How pathetic," then snorted and walked away. Upon his travel in the graveyard, he saw many more zombie-like people in the same situation as the previous. With their clenched fists, they were trying to escape the grave. But then, Mikhail saw a grave not as deep or daunting, though it glowed. A gold light shone from it, lighting up Mikhail's eyes. When he approached it, he was starstruck. The grave was filled with gold coins, gold in abundance, gold readily available, and gold for easy taking. So he jumped into the grave. Bathing in the gold coins, he was the happiest he had ever been. He threw them over his body, kissing the coins and laughing with joy. However, when he clenched a gold coin in his fist, that joy had gradually left his face. Mikhail could not open his hand. The gold coin had glued his fist shut. Every time that he tried to rip it open, the grave became deeper and deeper, until the top seemed an eternity away. Then Mikhail tried grabbing the dampened soil, expecting to dig his fingernails into the mud and claw himself out, but his fist wouldn't open. It refused to open. Though for a fleeting moment, he watched his skin and flesh tear away from his body. When he looked around him in the grave, the gold was no longer there, just the coin that glued his fist shut. Minutes became weeks, hours became months, and Mikhail was rotting inside that grave, leaving the real world for good. However, he would remain living in the graveyard, just like the others trapped there. Folk who saw nothing more than wealth, greedy people who chased after money all the way to their graves. Wealth in abundance, wealth that would now be theirs for the taking. But what good would that have done? Who shall they spend it to? What shall they buy? What luxuries lay in front of them besides the ugly, dirty soil sinking them deeper into the ground? What good could all these gold coins now do when they couldn't even open their clenched fists? Ivan was innocent, but that didn't mean that his trial would be easier, for he entered the room of reflection. A crystal ball, gigantic in size, was placed in the middle of the room. It showed what was, what is, and what could have been. Then a vision played through, showing the moments before the hiking trip. Yuri and Mikhail stood outside Ivan's house conspiring against him. Mikhail said, 70-30 split. We take him deep within the forest, where none can see or hear us, and we kill him. Why do I only get 30%? Yuri asked. Shh, keep your voice down, Mikhail replied. You'll be getting his girlfriend. I'll even lie to her and say you fought off a wild animal, trying to save Ivan selflessly. The vision then skipped towards the events that just passed. Ivan was so fixated on the fog in the forest and the safety of his friends that he never heard Yuri and Mikhail whispering behind his back. This was the moment the hut would chase them, but it never appeared in the vision. Instead, Yuri restrained Ivan from behind, grabbing his arms tightly. Mikhail then pierced Ivan's heart with the cold steel blade of his hunting knife. The vision then skipped to the present time. The hut revealed what happened to his friends in their trials. Then a woman entered the room, circling Ivan as her focus stayed on the man. She was immensely beautiful, beauty that felt wrong to exist in a world like this. Her eyes were grey, cat-like, and she wore a hooded cloak. Her voice so sweet, warm, and melodic. "You grieve them," the woman said, but Ivan never answered. He looked at the floor, taking everything in. The woman's voice became firmer. "You grieve men that led you to the slaughter." Ivan had tears in his eyes but did not look at her or respond. She says, "Listen carefully, child. Wealth does not summon monsters, it reveals them. Your friends did not become treacherous in these woods. They brought their treachery along with them. The forest merely stripped it bare. The hut does not kill the innocent. It does not seek out kindness. It merely devours those who are cruel to the world. This hut gives them a chance to rectify their mistakes, which most do not." Then Ivan tried speaking, but he looked at the woman in defeat, tears rolling down his pale face. "You walked into the woods with kindness in your heart. Even when they whispered behind your back, you did not poison your spirit. That is strength of the rarest kind. To remain good in a world trying to turn your heart into stone, that is the trial. They failed the hut because they failed themselves long before they failed you. Remember this, Ivan. Wealth tests men more surely than poverty. While poverty reveals hunger, wealth reveals character. You have lost friends, grieve them if you must, but do not carry the mistake of their betrayal as your own failing." The hut changed back to normal. It was small, cozy, but slightly stuffy. The front door squeaked open and Ivan, heartbroken, had walked out. He saw Baba Yaga pacing outside, but now he looked at her, really looked at her, and his eyes widened with shock. You were the woman who spoke to me inside the hut," said Ivan.
Yes, I was.
"But you didn't look the way you do now."
No, I did not.
Baba Yaga agreed. Ivan, confused, hurt, and frazzled, looked at the hut, then at Baba Yaga, and back at the hut. The old witch sighed.
There was a time,
She said,
when I carried all of myself in one body. Mercy, judgment, hunger, memory, wisdom, and power.
The wind moved through the forest, whispering almost.
But to judge fairly, one must see more clearly. And to survive long enough to judge, one must be feared. The world would not listen to a gentle witch in the woods.
Then Ivan pondered for a moment and said, "So the hut is your soul?"
Close. It's my conscience. I divided what I am. I placed my conscience where it could not be softened by pity, nor hardened by cruelty.
Ivan took a moment, recalling how angelic the woman inside the hut looked. She was so kind and warm, and Baba Yaga, in front of him, was so frightening.
If I carried her within me always, I would hesitate, and hesitation in matters of judgment and corruption allows it to spread.
The hut groaned in agreement.
I'm feared,
Baba Yaga said softly, almost disappointed.
but I am not unjust, so the hut ensures that.
Then Ivan had so many questions about his so-called friends Baba Yaga, her younger self, and everything that happened in between. She saw those questions brewing in his mind, but Baba Yaga concluded.
Go now, child. Leave the forest with your heart unchanged. That is your greatest inheritance. Guard it more fiercely than gold.
As Ivan bid Baba Yaga farewell, he walked away with a heavy heart and the realization of fake friends. Then Baba Yaga hopped into her mortar, taking off into the sky, flying away into the night. but not before the peculiar wooden hut with half-lidded eyes winked at her, then fell asleep for the night.